David floated in the vast emptiness, his world reduced to darkness and silence. The last thing he remembered was the bright glint of the space debris, hurtling toward him with terrifying speed. In the split second before it struck, there was only the cold, indifferent expanse of space. Now he was adrift. Pain flooded his senses like a tidal wave. A searing burn spread across his chest, as if scalding water had spilled over his skin. The sensation pulsed with his heartbeat gritting his teeth. David looked down and saw the damage to his spacesuit. The fabric was torn and blackened, a jagged hole gaping at his chest. If the suit had completely failed, I'd be dead already, he thought. Maybe the inner layers had held, keeping him alive, somehow. David craned his neck, his surroundings gradually coming into focus. The Earth spun far below, a blue and white marble tinged with the light of a distant sun. Just ahead, the looming structure of the International Space Station (ISS) drifted. His first instinct was to call for help, but when he spoke, only static filled his ears. His radio dead. The burning in his chest persisted, and the rest of his body throbbed with a dull, aching numbness. He couldn't feel his limbs properly, and he had no idea how injured he truly was. He blinked, his vision sharpening just enough to spot something nearby, another astronaut drifting about 6 to 8 meters away. The figure was motionless, arms outstretched as if frozen mid-motion. David squinted, trying to make out the person's face, but the reflective visor obscured it. With a surge of determination, he kicked his legs and reached out, but his movements were sluggish and strained. Each inch felt monumental. Time seemed to stretch and bend. He wasn't sure how long he had been floating like this. Minutes? Hours? Days? Memories of his life on Earth flickered in his mind. His fiancée, Emma, their plans for the weekend, a dinner with friends. The thought of her smile gave him something to hold on to, a fragile tether in the face of the creeping dread threatening to swallow him whole. David strained to get closer to the motionless astronaut when he noticed a shuttle docking at the ISS. Relief flooded his chest. Someone was coming to rescue him. 3 figures emerged from the shuttle, moving with practiced ease as they made their way toward the other astronaut. He waved his arms frantically, desperation rising. "Hey, over here." But the rescuers paid him no heed. They maneuvered effortlessly in zero gravity, reaching the motionless figure and carefully turning it around. Confusion washed over David. Why were they ignoring him? Then the radio in his helmet crackled to life, catching him off guard. Faint voices cut through the static. "Tragic accident, debris strike. Poor guy never stood a chance." David's breath caught in his throat. The rescuers' conversation was disorienting, confusing. Who were they talking about? He listened with intense focus as a sense of dread washed over him. They confirmed it. David's gone. A fatal impact. He didn't survive. The words hit him harder than any space debris ever could. David, they said. His name. How could they be talking about him when he was right here, still moving, still breathing? Panic clawed at his mind. "I'm here. I'm still here," he shouted into the void, his voice echoing back through the hollow emptiness of his helmet, unheard and unanswered. The 3 astronauts began to secure the other body for transport. As they did, the lifeless figure turned slightly, and David caught a glimpse of the name patch on the spacesuit. David? A cold dread gripped him, spreading through his veins like ice. It can't be. I'm right here, aren't I? But the truth had been lurking in the corners of his mind, unacknowledged, like a shadow just beyond sight. Deep down he had known. The burning pain in his chest, the numbness in his limbs, it wasn't just his body failing. It was the last sensations of a dying mind. The other David was secured, and the rescuers began to drift back toward the ISS, leaving him behind in the void. "Wait," he cried, but they didn't respond, didn't even glance in his direction. They disappeared back into the station and he was alone again. Desperation took hold and he remembered something. Astronauts could slip their arms from inside the suit sleeves to check on their gear. Maybe if he could reach the hole in his chest area, he could access the severity of the damage. He carefully maneuvered his arm, bringing his hand to the hole. His fingers slipped out of the torn fabric and into open space. He expected to feel the chill of the vacuum, but instead, an excruciating burning sensation engulfed his hand, as though it were being consumed by fire and frost simultaneously. He stares at his exposed hand protruding from the suit. Noon could survive direct exposure to the vacuum of space. The reality crashed down on him, heavy and undeniable. He was no longer part of the world he had known. His consciousness lingered, a solitary flicker in an endless dark void. For the first time, David felt tears sting his eyes. They wouldn't fall, There was nowhere for them to go inside his helmet, but they are there, pooling at the corners of his eyes. His vision blurred as he stared out into the star-filled abyss. His breath came in shallow gasps, more out of instinct than necessity. He floated aimlessly with nothing to tether him to reality. The earth continued its silent spin below, indifferent to the fate of one lone soul drifting in its orbit. Time had no meaning. The cold was relentless, seeping deeper into his mind. He clung to memories as if they were life rafts, though they came to him in fragments. Emma's voice calling his name, the smell of her hair as they danced in the kitchen, the way she laughed when he tried to cook. But the memories slipped through his grasp, distorted and distant, as though they belonged to someone else. The stars around him began to shift. No, it was he who was moving. Slowly, imperceptibly, he drifted further away from the ISS, from everything he had ever known. The thought made him shudder. He closed his eyes to shut out the sight of his own hand, frozen and motionless, protruding from the torn suit like a grim reminder of what he had lost. As he drifted on, the radio crackled to life one last time, but the voices were distant, faint whispers on the edge of perception. They spoke in tones he didn't understand, in a language that he couldn't make out. He wasn't sure if they were real or just the last remnants of his own fractured mind. The burning sensation had faded, leaving only a numb, hollow ache in its place. He opened his eyes and stared out into the vastness, his gaze drawn inevitably toward the blinding light ahead. He didn't know whether to fear it or embrace it. Perhaps he would drift forever, never finding solace or companionship. Perhaps he would become a part of the darkness that stretched on for eternity. Or perhaps, when he finally succumbed to the void, there would be nothing at all, just oblivion waiting to swallow him whole. But for now there was only the silence, the cold, and the haunting knowledge that he was utterly, irrevocably alone.